All right, this week I am very pleased to introduce you and to be able to have a chance to talk with Chris Stack. Chris Stack is a person who wears many hats. I'll let him kind of explain what that means. But he's a person with an incredible background and has had the opportunity to work with many incredible people. And I first got to sort of know him in the virtual sense by watching his posts on Facebook. And watching him develop his work on the website experimentalsynth.com. He is one of these people that always finds a way to intrigue me. And so I was really excited to get an opportunity to talk to him for the podcast. And so with that, I'll say hi to Chris. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Hey, Darwin. Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. Getting ready for NAMM. Gulp. So
oh yeah,
it's always
I know that feeling.
Yeah, really. It's I think I'm getting a migraine already, and I haven't even gotten on the plane. So why don't we kick this off by having you tell people about what your creative and your creative work life is about?
Okay, well, it's kind of about a little bit of everything. I was thinking back on it a while back. I saw somebody post something that reminded me of an early influence that I'd almost forgotten about, and that was Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells. I remember when that first came out. It was a very early album of multi-track music with one artist playing most or all of the music, and that really impressed me back then. That was one of the things that kind of really turned on the light in my head that, hey, you don't have to do just one thing. You don't have to play just one instrument. And that kind of spilled over to a lot of other aspects of my life. And I don't know, maybe I'm a dilettante or something, but my interests have always been drawn in a number of different directions. I wouldn't say all directions, because there are a lot of directions I have no interest in at all. But I don't know. I think I'm interested in interesting things. And, the definition of that is up to interpretation.
Sure.
Well, revision at any time.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I noticed is that you pointed me towards a set of blogs on the Moog Foundation site where you kind of talk about some of your background, and I just kind of. I sort of got a second respect for you when you were willing to kind of talk about your prog rock background and your, at least for a long period of time, your desire to have the stack of keyboards, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, that seems to have...
I haven't got over that yet.
Okay, well, I was going to say, it seems like maybe it's changed, but maybe it hasn't.
No, not at all. That part has stuck with me throughout the years.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what has gotten you to be where you are now? Where right now you kind of play in this area where you're working with different companies and you're interacting with different companies, but you're also introducing a lot of people to what's going on. That kind of implies an awful lot about having a background with a lot of detailed interaction with music gear. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to be the person that you are now?
Probably as revealing for me as it is for you. Started out we always had a piano in the house. My mother was a music lover, and she saved up and bought one of the tiniest spinets you could ever get, I think. I believe she did tell me it was the smallest piano you could buy with 88 keys on it at the time. She scraped her pennies and bought it before she got married, I think. And it was always in the house. And I was always a little bit interested in it. And one of my dad's aunts had one too, and I was always kind of plunking away on it. In second grade, I started taking piano lessons. She was in Catholic school at the time, and I took piano lessons in the convent. So I was in there with the black robe nun teaching me how to play simple little songs. And I didn't do that for very long, maybe probably less than a year. But the interest in it stuck with me. And we still always had the piano in the house, and I would plunk away on it, and did that a little bit until around the time I was 16. We would move south. I was actually living in South Carolina, and a lot of my friends were starting to learn how to play guitar. So if some of them, showed me some chords and stuff, and I still remembered a little bit of, what middle C was, where D and E were.
Right.
And I kind of leapfrogged back and forth with what I knew from one instrument to the other, and eventually figured out how to play a C major chord on a piano, and just kind of took off from there. The other thing that happened a little bit before that, before South Carolina, I lived in Atlanta for a few years, from like 68 to 72. I remember, I think it was 6th or 7th grade, the teacher played this new album that just came out, and it was switched on Bach. So I am one of those many people who just got turned on to synthesizers because they heard switched on Bach when it first came out.
Right.
It's hard for me to overemphasize how eye-opening that experience was. It just, the new sounds that I'd never heard before, music, technology. It really kind of kick-started a lot of artistic and scientific curiosity in me.
I'm always curious about the switched on Bach experience.
Mm-hmm.
When she played the music for you, when this teacher played the music for you, did she also show you the album cover?
I think so. I think she did. I don't recall poring over it. It was probably one of those things where, there's 20 kids in the class, and we each got to look at it for 8 seconds.
I see. Because for me, I remember almost more influential than the music, the picture of the synthesizer on the front cover totally just twisted my head off, right?
Yeah, and that was probably around the same time Star Trek was coming out too. And we were still launching rockets at the moon, so it was kind of synergy.
Right, indeed.
Things happening at the time.
Yeah, so given kind of the head twister that switched on Bach was, how did that translate into you changing up your musical direction? Because to this point you fiddling around with piano like stuff with rock bands, but how did that turn you into a guy who wanted to emulate Rick Wakeman, for example? Did that open the door for new music, or was that a direction you were headed anyway?
Not right away. It took. I was probably 10 years old when I heard switched on Bach. When I was 15 or 16, started getting the guitar. Around then, probably when I was 15, I went over to a friend's house, and he, as I was leaving, he hands me an album and says, "Hey, you should listen to this." And so I took it home, put it on, and it was Yes Is Close to the Edge. That blew me away. It was like, I'd say that was in some ways as much or more of a revelation than switched on Bach was. At the time I was into some of the stuff everybody was listening to. I was never really a huge rock fan, although back then I probably was a bit more. The rock that was there combined with the softer passages, just and Wakeman's mini Moog work and all that really captured my imagination.
Right.
And I think, and even by John Emerson's lyrics, I was just so blown away by that. I mean, that was his lyrics at that time to me were as progressive as any instrument anybody else was playing.
Yeah, I think that's actually an interesting point. For me, the prog thing was really embodied by two groups: Emerson, Lake and Palmer, because the best friend was like totally into Keith Emerson, but the other band that doesn't get a lot of discussion anymore, but was really super influential to me was Gentle Giant. Which also,
I like that too.
And there again, I thought very adventurous lyrical content as well as structural and virtuosic playing, but it tended more to be songs rather than just show-offs for good chops. And I think sometimes people forget about that being that there was as much progression in lyricism as there was with the instrumental playing.
One thing I loved about Gentle Giant was the interplay of guitar and clavinet. I've always been kind of a sucker for, somehow, I don't know how, but I, even at that age, was really into classical music. And at that time, particularly like Renaissance and Baroque music.
Sure.
So that clavinet doing not the funky clavinet type sound, but really kind of almost like a finger-picked lute.
Yeah, or a harpsichordish kind of thing. Yeah, right, exactly. you became someone who got fascinated with prog and started working on those chops, but simultaneously you got into electronics, right?
Almost simultaneously. I probably was getting into prog a little bit before the electronics.
Okay.
Probably from first grade until about 10th grade. I was a pretty bad student in school. I mean, just barely passing every year.
Okay.
And it was really kind of around when I started listening to Yes, and kind of reignited a little bit of that artistic and scientific curiosity that kind of got started with Switched On Bach. It sounds funny to say, but it really made me a better student in school, and it just kind of got me more interested in things. Mm-hmm. At the time we'd moved to South Carolina. It was a fairly, really rural area, but a somewhat rural area, and I was really not happy living there for a number of years. And when I kind of got into that, it was something that sparked my interest, and it really just kind of made me engage a little bit more. And I think that it really kind of showed in my schoolwork too. So by the time I graduated, I was like pretty much all A's and B's.
Uh-huh.
I would say that electronic music led me astray a little bit there. I didn't really jump straight into college after that. I wanted to take a little bit of time off and worked a couple of factory jobs and did a quick little pass at college, but didn't really get into it because I was really, at that point, really getting interested in synthesizers.
Okay.
And I thought the quickest way to do it was just to go straight, get a job, start making money, and
buy some synthesizers. Yeah, right.
Yeah, which I did. My first synth was a Korg micro preset, followed by a Korg 770. After that, I took out a bigger loan, and at the same time bought a micro Moog and a Crumar Performer string synth.
There's the beginning of the stack. Yeah.
Around the same time or right after, bought one of those Yamaha electric piano. I forget what its number was. It wasn't like a grand. It was kind of the vaguely Rhodesy Yamaha electric piano around the same time.
Oh yeah. Right. I can't remember.
It had the case built into it. The top came off and became the legs. I mean, unlike the CS80, thinking back on it, that thing sounded really terrible.
Yeah, there are some cases where nostalgia may be misplaced, and
kept trading up and up and up.
Yeah, given that set of gear, it also sort of implies that you would have been working with bands at the time, because none of those things were MIDI-fied. Did you get into recording? Did you have sort of like a personal music work thing, or were you mostly working in bands at this point?
More of a personal thing. I was really into prog. Let me just say in late 70s, Spartanburg, South Carolina was not the hotbed of prog fandom.
Right.
It's great band, but to give you an idea, Marshall Tucker was the opening band for probably the first 8 concerts I went to.
Okay.
And they were actually, for a Southern rock band, they were really very innovative.
Wow.
They had a flute player and a mini Moog on a number of their songs. And interesting little aside to that is right around the same time, they had their own recording studio kind of on the outskirts of town. And I saw something in the paper. A representative from the Moog factory was going to be there one night showing the brand new Polymoog. So I went down there and got to play that for a little bit, and that blew me away.
Oh, no doubt.
One thing I remember about that loving was that was the first time I'd ever heard anything do sample and hold on a filter cutoff.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Well, it's interesting because I, like you, grew up in a real rural area. My rural area was northern Wisconsin. And believe me, no Moog representative was coming up to, nose pick Wisconsin to show anything. And so I'm actually a little envious.
Come to South Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah, have to come to South Carolina for a little culture.
I forget who the guy was. I remember him telling me he had worked. He was an engineer and he had worked on the old big 12-stage phaser or something that they had.
Oh, okay. So I'm curious about how you got into electronics, because when I look at your history, you've got this. You kind of have this player track. You have kind of an engineering and circuit design track. in kind of a marketing track. And I'm curious about where the electronic and circuit design track, because especially right now with the resurgence of interest in modular synths, kind of the resurgence of interest in DIY kind of things, there are a lot of people that want to know, how can I take my musicianly background and somehow pull together an electronics capable background? And I have to admit, I don't know how that works.
Some of that really kind of kicked in right after we just left off in that story. Part of it is, looking back on it, I was just really lucky in some instances. Just, happened to be in the right place at the right time, and that right place was someplace you would have never imagined it would have been. I used to get a kick out of this old saying, you got to bloom where you're planted. And again, I think some of it was, working hard and applying myself.
Right.
Actually, probably a lot of it was, or like Woody Allen said, 80% of success is just showing up. I actually got a couple of fairly lucky breaks. I'd say I was playing some prog stuff, and it was mostly for my enjoyment. I had a band down in the basement for years, and I never really had a good enough ear, probably good enough chops to really learn to play covers of Close to the Edge and stuff like that. Right. I have friends who used to do that and did a great job of it, but I never really honed that skill enough. So we were just doing originals, usually a trio, me, a bass player, and a drummer. I had a drummer that I just worked with who had a really good voice, and we had another vocalist, and did that for quite a while. And I kind of enjoyed it. Everybody else in the band, I think, was a little frustrated because a lot of them weren't as dedicated to more the experimental type of stuff like I was, and they liked rock more and wanted to get out and play in bars. And
sure.
As long as I was having fun, I didn't care. But right around that time, too, I started realizing that working in a zinc die casting factory was not something I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
I wonder why.
Oh, yeah. I was working in this plant where they made the strike wheels for big flyers. I figured out one day I was lifting about 40,000 pounds of metal a day and got me in good shape for a while. But yeah, that kind of made me decide that I needed to do something. And my keyboard setup was probably a Korg Poly 61, Roland JX3P, my first MIDI synth. The brand new Roland SH101 that I just bought. Probably still had the micro mode. Mm-hmm. And I was as I was playing, experimenting around with them, and my brand new Yamaha 4-track cassette deck, I was getting more and more curious. What's going on when I turn this knob?
Right.
And about that time, a friend of mine had gone to a local tech school and was telling me about his classes. And thought, hey, it's all my options here. That's the one that's interesting to me the most. So I started going to Spartanburg Technical College, actually starting out in industrial electronics. Did that for about a quarter and switched over to electrical engineering, and wound up getting my 2-year degree in electrical engineering technology.
Oh, okay. What is industrial electronics? Is that just like wiring stuff up?
Yeah, a little bit more towards fixing things electrical in a factory. There were a lot of, at that time, there was still a lot of cotton mills and some other industry around. And that area was a very industrial area. There's a BMW plant down there and a bunch of other stuff. Okay. And, the engineering was basically, it was a 2-year degree, so it wasn't really like you were a design engineer, but you were being trained to work with them. And there would be various other similar type of things, other higher level electronic stuff, a bit more microprocessing, microprocessor programming. And
sure.
Yes, I did that for 2 years. Got out of there. I actually made good grades there. I was on the dean's list most of the time. And it was great, too, because at that time, I had, for the time, a pretty decent synth setup. And a lot of the stuff I was learning in school, I had immediate applications for it at home. And I mean, not just electronics, but particularly like physics and math. In Trig, when I was adding sine waves, I could go home and get my Yamaha DX100 and add a couple sine waves. And I had an oscilloscope at the time. I was able to pull it up on the screen and actually see and hear a representation of the stuff that I was studying in Trig.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. I mean, people go so far out of their way now to try and model mathematical concepts, and some of these concepts are actually so easy to implement on synthesizers. Now let's jump forward a bit. You now have this keyboard life, and it sounds like you had a little 4-track recorder, and you were doing that kind of thing. Did you keep on updating that? So like when MIDI came in, did you get a bunch of MIDI stuff? Did you kind of follow that track?
Yeah, no, it was on, man. I bought everything. It's been no turning back since then. I have been a gear hound ever since then. If I still had every piece of gear I've ever owned. Shortly after that last setup I just described to you, then Sonic ESQ1 and Mirage came out, and that became my two workhorses.
Yeah. So did you ever get into like the computer sequencing end of it as well?
Oh yeah. I had a Yamaha CX5M.
Oh, yes.
Remember that?
Yes, yeah. The music computer, all one word.
Yeah. Although I actually can't say I really did sequencing on that. That was something that looked really cool and had an interesting FM synth in it, the built-in librarian. So I really used that more as an instrument. My first sequencer, actually I was just made a comment on this on a Synthopia post today. They had an article about some old sequential circuit sequencer. My first real sequencer was the Sequential Circuits cartridge for the Commodore 64.
Right. Or I remember being at a music store one time, kind of trying to search out some old analog gear that might be laying around. And they were like, "Oh, you mean like sequential circuit?" I'm like, yeah. You have some SCI stuff? And they're like, "Yeah, we got one piece behind the counter here." And he pulls out that. And I was like, thanks, but no.
Yeah.
Maybe another one of those things that doesn't quite uphold up. Although, quite frankly...
if you had a Commodore 64 working... Yeah, I mean, you surely would have jumped on it.
I was going to say it would be kind of interesting now to go back and see a Commodore 64 with one of those sequencing cartridges and see what came out of it.
Oh, yeah. I can't even remember what its capabilities were. I just remembered, being able to sequence was just like, oh my God, I can, that frees me up for this, I can do this and that. And, about that time too, I was in school and, didn't really have time to get together with my friends a lot. So I was actually getting, at that point, shifting a little bit more over to the self-contained, electronic musician as opposed to the guy in the band kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about that a little bit because what you mentioned before about working with a band who might have been a little frustrated, because I was a guitar player. Prior to getting into electronic music, I was a guitar player, but I also liked composition. Mm-hmm. And the reason I got into electronic music is because all of a sudden I could experiment freely and I could try things out without either having to humiliate myself in front of the band. Because there were times, I remember the one time, writing out charts and putting them in front of the band, and the bass player just kind of sneers about how, I had notated a certain eighth note thing. And I was like, there's got to be a way to try music without getting humiliated for trying, right?
Yeah.
As soon as the first time someone bolted MIDI onto a computer, I was in. I was all in, right? I'm curious for you, what was the thing that was kind of the driving force? Was it time? Was it just a desire to want to chill out and work on your own thing? Did you have a noise in your head that you had to get out? What was it that really was sort of like the innermost force for you?
Well, I don't know if I'd say there was a noise in my head I wanted to get out. I knew there were noises out there I wanted to get into my head. There was all kind of new stuff coming out. At that point, too, I was probably getting away from what you would call prog. A lot of the bands I was listening to went off in directions I didn't particularly care for. And I actually went through a big phase, and it still lasts up to this day, where Joni Mitchell was my favorite musician. And some of that stuff around his era and Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, when she was playing with Pat Metheny and Jaco Pastorius.
Oh, man. Yeah, I saw that band. Yeah. That was shockingly gorgeous stuff. The Shadows and Light tour. Oh, yeah. That was so good.
Yeah, and what kind of helped that, too, is the drummer I mentioned was a really killer singer. When we were really young and first starting to hang out together, he was really into Queen and could sing it all.
Oh, really? Holy cow.
And he kind of got into Joni Mitchell after I did, and he could sing a bunch of her stuff. I mean, almost everything. I remember on that Yamaha 4-track doing multi-track versions, me on 12-string guitar, and him doing a couple vocal tracks of People's Parties from Court and Spark.
Mm-hmm.
The other songs. We did actually for a while. We did a couple of covers of a couple of piano songs off Court and Spark. I think at that time I had the ESQ1 and I could do a semi-decent piano.
Right.
Around that time too, that kind of got me back into piano. My taste in instrumentation and in some ways music are a little different than a lot of people who kind of followed the same track. But even when I was in the Prague, I never liked Hammond organ.
Yeah.
To me, it was just something people played when they couldn't afford enough synthesizers.
Right.
Most of my life, I've never really been that crazy about Rhodes either. Every once in a while, I like them. I kind of enjoy playing them too, but never been a really huge Rhodes fan. But
well, I think there was a sense at the time that if you were playing a Rhodes, it was because you were either at a venue or in a studio that couldn't afford a real piano.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, maybe not. I think Miles Davis probably didn't think that.
Oh, right.
Rich's group. Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, I think I like them now better than I did back then, even though I still almost never, go to that sound.
Right.
But Joni Mitchell's piano stuff, I love, and really got into Keith Jarrett, Cologne concerts.
Yeah, it's another one of those albums that really hooked a lot of people into a new way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So
that really kicked me into a lot of piano improvisation.
Oh, neat.
Which has really been a big part of my music off and on ever since.
Now, jumping ahead a little bit further, at some point you started getting involved in the music industry. How did that happen?
By a circuitous path. When I got out of college, I went to work for and this was one of those somewhat lucky breaks, went to work for one of the very few computer manufacturers in South Carolina. Happened to be over, just across the county line from where I lived. So there's a company called Computer Dynamics. Started out as a repair tech, but pretty quick, like within a few months, I think, wound up working in the engineering department. Starting out helping the people who did the printed circuit design. They had these huge old workstations they used to do it on. And when they get done with the board design, they would print them out like 4:1 scale and using a pen plotter. And my job was to get the schematic and a yellow highlighter and make sure that every line on the schematic corresponded to a line on the PC artwork. Tracing lines for about 2 or 3 days, and they were actually fairly big, fairly complex boards. Did that for a little bit, and then they had an opening, and I became a printed circuit designer and did that all day, every day for 10 years. Near the end of working for Computer Dynamics, some of the folks in the marketing department had just started getting into like Photoshop, and I think it was actually even like all this photo style back then, Photoshop. Mm-hmm. They came down one day and said, "Hey, you know how to use this CAD software? Maybe you can help us with Photoshop." Thus began my segue into marketing. After that, I spent 10 years for a company that actually my lab partner in college started. He was doing installs for a local cable system and noticed they had a bunch of broken converter boxes. So he started this company fixing converter boxes. And in the 10 years that I was at Computer Dynamics, he had built it up pretty big. He had like 30 or 40 employees and was wanting to get into manufacturing. Mm-hmm. So I came over, started working with him, helped him with that. I kind of got the manufacturing part of that company going, and then switched over into marketing because I needed more help there. And for 10 years there, I had one boss that recalled me as utility infielder. I kind of switched around between manufacturing manager, marketing manager. About the last year and a half, I was engineering manager. So did a lot of different things. That company eventually shut down, and I was working with some of the other people there. We were trying to get another company going. And about that time, a component sales rep that I do, he knew I was into electronic music. He said, "Hey, I hear Moog needs a marketing manager." He was freaked up. And I should say, actually, let's just get back a little bit, because one of the biggest things that ever happened to me, I really think, so when I was still at Computer Dynamics, and this was part of one of those things about kind of being lucky and in the right place at the right time. It was, this time I'm full-on synth freak, up to my ears in electronic music and electronics. And one day I pick up the paper, and there's an article that said Bob Moog lives in Asheville and teaches at UNCA and is giving a public lecture this Saturday. And I flipped out. I mean, at that point, I had no idea he was living in Asheville. I thought he was some synth god that lived up on Valhalla.
Right, yeah.
So, of course, I drove up and attended the lecture. After it was over, I went up and introduced myself and talking to him for a minute, and then I gave him my card and said, hey, if you ever need a circuit designer, give me a call. So this was back in the days before cell phones. So I'm at work the next morning, and the phone rings. Hey, Chris, this is Bob Moog. After I picked my jaw up off the floor.
Right.
I wound up doing a little freelance work for him, designing 3 different circuit boards, which were part of his multi-touch keyboard setup.
I remember when that came out and being baffled by it, baffled by the technology behind it.
It was some heady times for me. I mean, to go from I'm this guy in his basement with a couple of synthesizers to I'm sorry, I got to take this call off. I was on the phone.
That's wild.
My head swelled a little bit. Yeah.
And so so that was like your introduction into MI. How did you continue? Because at some point you ended up as like marketing manager for Moog Music, right?
Yeah, I should say that the funny thing is that having done that work for Bob and becoming marketing manager had almost no relationship to each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of strange when I think back on it. That was probably early 90s thereabouts or so I did that.
So that would have been back when he was doing it as Big Briar, right?
Yeah, definitely okay. Big Briar. And actually, on that blog post, I've got a couple of old pieces of schematic and stuff about Big Briar and the header and everything. There's a couple of boards for him, but unfortunately, my job at DBtronics, the cable TV electronics company, was consuming so much of my time that I wasn't able to really continue doing side work for him. After the multi-touch keyboard thing, a little bit later, he called me up and was just starting on a MIDI Airman.
Okay.
And I did a little bit of work on that. I didn't actually even get to do any board layouts. One of the first steps of that is particularly somebody hands you just a paper schematic. You have to do what he calls schematic capture, which is basically redraw the schematic in CAD software. And then you dump that database over into the PCB side of it, and then you do the board layout. So I did part of that and wound up kind of handing that off to one of my coworkers.
So you actually kind of got disconnected from Bob at that point. How did you ever get back?
Very much. Well, I didn't really. And there's a really bizarre story about that. I'll tell you here in a second. But, I would see him. Asheville was about an hour from Spartanburg where I was living. And even back then was a much more interesting town. So I was actually driving up to Asheville quite often. So much so that a decade before I moved up here, most people up here thought I already lived here because they saw me so much. And I would run into Bob every once in a while, at a bookstore or something. We would talk, but never at any great length. And unfortunately, when he died in 2005, I think I did see one time I did get to hang out with him. The last time I saw him alive actually was at a local bar here called the Gray Eagle. And I don't know if you're familiar with Pamela Kirsten, the thereminist.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was playing there with the band Barbez. Bob and I sitting at the front row table watching her, and that was the time I got to hang out with him the most. And unfortunately, the last time I saw him alive. Yes, it was shortly after that Barry, my friend who was still doing design for him, mentioned to me that he was sick. I had no idea. I don't think Barry even knew how bad it was. It was just Bob's sick.
Mm-hmm.
It was really a strange thing that happened when Bob died. At that time, I was playing a lot of gigs in Asheville. I started out doing some like Keith Jarrett solo piano stuff, and I was also into a lot of like Peter Gabriel's Passion and that type of stuff. Okay. Asheville was starting to get for Appalachian Mountain Town, a pretty sizable belly dance community. And I started playing with a lot of these folks and using some acoustic instruments. I had an old bouzouki and eventually got my first oud and all that stuff. And wound up doing a lot of belly dance gigs. And we had this one we did every Sunday night. And for that, it was one of the bigger performances we would do. I really kind of made a big show out of it. I had this singer I worked with that was kind of like Lisa Gerrard. Okay. From Dead Can Dance. Right. And we'd get 2 or 3 percussionists and another guy played sitar, another guy played accordion, and I would bring a little bit of everything. That Tubular Bells influence of, hey, you can't play it all. Mm-hmm. A lot of times those days I would bring, I had my Yamaha MO8, it was a synth, and I had a oud, flute, melodica, bass. We would do these big, kind of spontaneously improvised shows with a belly dancer in a hookah lounge. Mm-hmm. one Sunday, I'm packing up to drive up, and I got the idea to do this poem that I had heard Nipsey Russell recite it on the Tonight Show many years ago. It was an Arabic sounding poem, but it was written by an English guy about 150 years ago. It's this poem called Abu Ben Adam. And I should maybe, it's not a long poem, I should maybe recite it for you, just kind of set the tone.
Sure.
Because Abu Ben Adam, may his tribe increase, awoke one night from a dream of peace, and saw within the moonlight in his room, making it rich like a lily in bloom, was an angel writing the book of gold. Exceeding peace made Ben Adam bold, and to the presence in the room he said, "What writest thou?" The vision raised his head, with a look made of all sweet accord, answered, "The names of those who love the Lord." In his mind, one said, "Abu." "Nay, not so," replied the angel. Abu spoke more low but cheerily still and said, "I pray thee then, write my name as one who loves his fellow men." Well, the angel rode and vanished, but the next night it came again with a great wakening light, and showed all the names whom love of God had blessed, and lo, Ben Adam's name led all the rest. So at the performance that night, I recited that over a low drum beat, and that afternoon I called the dancer who was dancing that night and asked her if she had a golden book, and she kind of acted out the part of the angel.
Mm-hmm.
It was, for a Sunday night hookah lounge gig, it was kind of fun, kind of interesting. So the next morning I'm at work, and I get an email from Barry, my circuit design friend, telling me that Bob Moog had just died. I was really kind of shocked because, again, at that point I had no idea it was anything terminal or anything.
Right.
His funeral was the next day at a synagogue up here in Asheville. And so Barry and I go up, and we're at the funeral, kind of sitting in the back row because there aren't that many people. The rabbi is doing his thing. And at the end, he says, "I'd like to call Bob's children up so they can say a few words about their father." Bob's oldest daughter got up and says, I'd like to start by reciting my father's favorite poem, or one of my father's favorite poems. And then she goes into Abu Ben Adam.
Oh, my.
And I just start shaking, and I'm in the back row. Literally, my knees are knocking together. And it is really, because then it hit me too. Because going into the funeral, we learned a little bit about when and where he died. It was like I got the idea to do that poem probably within an hour of him dying. And it's not like that's a ultra popular poem or anything.
Right.
It was just this really strange coincidence that really kind of marked that event for me.
Wow.
Yeah, so anyway, about a year and a half later, I finally went to work for Moog, and again, I had a connection through a component sales rep, and wound up eventually getting the job. It was funny. I went up and was interviewed by the president of Moog and by Bob's widow. I had a really good feeling. It seemed like I was a really good fit for it. New synthesizers and the electronics, and I thought for sure I had the job. It was kind of indicated to me that I probably did, but then, like, the next day I get a call and they've hired somebody else.
Oh, my.
And then about a week later I get a call again, and they offered me the job again. I guess whoever they hired didn't work out.
That's strange. That's, also good that it ended up playing out. Because that kind of, that's where you kind of got your MI bones then, right?
Oh, yeah, very much so, yeah.
Now, since then, one of the places where you came into my radar real strongly is with the work that Paul Vaughn has been doing with his thing. I don't even know what to call it.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to call it?
He invented the technology behind the Moog guitar when I was still a Moog.
Right.
And a lot of my time there was spent with the launch of that and various things. But then afterwards, probably what you're talking about is the Vaughn 96.
That's what I'm talking about, yeah.
Yeah, that was after I had left Moog, and Paul and I had become friends when I was there, and he actually wasn't living in Asheville when we launched the guitar, but he eventually moved here. And, I'm a guitar player in some ways as much as I am a keyboard player, guitar and oud and bass.
If you watch kind of the scroll images at the top of Experimental Synth, I think the only picture actually of you is you playing guitar, not playing keyboards, which is kind of funny because I think of you primarily as a keyboard guy, except you've got a lot of history tied into guitar as well.
I do. Keyboards are maybe slightly more my main instrument, but not as much. Not by a huge amount, and probably more of the gigs I play are on stringed instruments than are on keyboards.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Vaughn 96 because So there are a lot of phrases that kind of stick around this thing. So sometimes it's called an acoustic synthesizer. I don't understand. Help me understand a little bit.
Well, yeah, the first thing to understand when you see particularly our first videos on that, and almost any of them, is that the guitar is not plugged into an amp or anything. It's just a guy sitting on a chair with a guitar, and it's making those sounds.
Okay.
It is actually making the strings make those sounds.
All right. So it's a string activation system.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, then in more ways than just a sustainer, because it's actually doing some pretty sophisticated control of harmonics. And it really is, and you're in a pretty strong sense really offering sound with that.
Okay, so how does do you play one in your own work?
I do. I actually do not have one of my own yet. I get to borrow them quite often.
Sure.
I have a Moog guitar that I use quite a bit.
I see. Okay. So what, from like a player standpoint, what's different about it in terms of playing style or playing mechanism?
Well, it's really nothing, and it's one of those things that kind of like the Moog guitar that you really, until you play it, it's you see it and you see it just something interesting that sounds cool, but really feeling it under your fingers is where you really kind of get it. Mm-hmm. When particularly with the Vaughn 96, when you're sitting there on a rocking chair with this guitar that's not plugged into anything, and harmonics are dancing out of it like that, and then you feel the body guitar vibrating against your chest, you feel it tingling your fingers because the strings are still vibrating. Mm-hmm. It just becomes a very visceral, very very connected playing experience. I've played some guitars since, and they're kind of fun, but when you pluck a string and a trumpet comes out, it's cool, but it's hard to really feel as connected to that sound as when the string you're actually plucking is making that sound.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's
not that it does trumpet sounds, but it does some pretty out there sounds, and you really feel it making them while they're doing it.
Well, I actually think though that it's important that it makes its own sound. My first experience, I was one of the first people in the U.S. to get because I had friends who knew friends to have the Roland GR300 guitar synth when it first came out, right? And I remember at first being kind of frustrated that, it made a really bad trumpet or it made a really bad violin. But what it actually did was sort of like that iconic screaming elephant noise that guitar synth.
Kind of thing?
Yeah. All of a sudden, when you realize that's actually the sound of this instrument, it became really a great thing to use, as long as you just embraced it as that's the sound of the instrument. It seems to me like with the Vaughn 96 that's what's happening there. There's actually still the process of defining what the voice of this instrument is, and embracing that.
Yeah, and actually the possibilities of it are still pretty much in infancy. The hardware is there that it has very precise control over, I think, 16 harmonics per string. It's capable of doing quite a bit with the firmware that's in it now, but it's really just kind of scratching the surface of what acoustic synthesis can do, or what can actually be done with that hardware.
Sure. So let's say that because I've kind of fallen in love with some of these videos. They're actually really, really cool.
The Vaughn 96 ones?
Yeah. So what does it...
There's one, that first one that really kind of took off. That's actually my nephew.
Oh, is it really?
The guy's playing. Yeah, the guy with the longer blonde hair.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's actually just started his second semester up at Berkeley now.
Oh, interesting. So if I wanted to get one of these in my basement studio, what do I have to do?
Well, we did the Kickstarter for him, which went really well.
Yeah, I remember it was
for 50,000. We got 120,000.
Yeah.
And, that video with my nephew. It's got like 100,000 views in a week.
Oh man.
Awesome.
Well, it was sort of like highlighted on every music blog that there was.
It was crazy. It wasn't even just music. I was on Huffington Post.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, there was one
And you didn't
video
even
I
have
did.
you didn't even have to pose nude, and you ended up on the front page.
No. I mean, it was really kind of a weird thing. As it's one of the other videos I did was just me doing some improv on it, and it was one of the few videos where I was actually running it into a mixer and everything, and through a little bit of delay.
Right.
And I think it was what's that blog, Mashable.
Yeah.
I think they had just snagged some of the video and had it on a screen in the background, and there was this woman up there talking about the Vaughn 96. They didn't ask me if they could use it, but I, of course, had no problem with them doing it.
Right.
So there's this talking head, describing the Vaughn 96, and up on the screen, I see my hand sitting in front of the fireplace. Next thing you know, Huffington Post picks it up, and it was really kind of surreal.
That is. Back to my question though, when are these going to be available? When am I going to be able to get my hands on it?
Well, we did a run of, I think approximately 100, and have sold out. So we're kind of getting things together to look at a possible next one. Now I should say also, I don't know when this will go on air live, but Paul Vaux and our new CEO Michael Keeler are at NAMM right now, and Paul and Michael will be showing a new product.
Oh, really? Awesome.
Yeah, they're in the sharing a booth with the Moog Foundation.
Oh, cool.
So stop by their booth and you'll see something new. Given
that this is actually not going to air until after NAMM, is there anything you can say about it, or should I just wait and...
Yeah, I can't really say anything right now.
Okay. Well, if nothing else, what I'll do is on my outro tag or whatever, I'll just mention that because I'm going to make a point of going and checking it out for sure. So before I let you go, and again, I appreciate you being willing to give me so much of your time. I have to ask you about one thing that I'm really curious about, because I'm curious about this in relationship to a lot of the people I talk to. It seems like there are certain areas of the country that have a magnetic draw for creative people. So, New York has always kind of been that way. San Francisco has always kind of been that way, as well as like the outlying areas of Berkeley and stuff like that. Los Angeles often is that. Portland has become that, and Asheville has become that.
Yeah.
In a very real way. There is a lot of discussion about Asheville as kind of first of all, it's sort of like, I hate to say it, but sort of like the Portland of the South or something.
Oh, that's a valid comparison.
Yeah, and
I
just
know a lot of people that have gone back and forth between the two cities.
Oh, really? Well, it just seems interesting that that this area has all of a sudden sort of generated a culture that is very unique for the South, certainly, but kind of unique among small cities in the U.S. anyway. What do you think causes that? And
well, it's an amazing place, and it's actually in some ways that it's not as new as you might think. I'm sitting in my apartment on the north side of town, about half a mile from where Bob Moog lives. My good friend Gary Yelton, keyboard writer, been in the business forever. Lived about a quarter mile from me. About a mile from where I'm sitting, Bartók wrote one of his piano concertos. So it's been, and there's this big hotel up on the hill, Grove Park Inn, where Goodyear and Edison and a bunch of those guys used to get together and plan out the 20th century.
So why is it that chuckleheads like me weren't aware of it until recently? I mean, is this been a well-kept Southern secret, or is this...
It was quite a well-kept secret for a while, and actually it really hit a decline in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. When I first started coming up to Asheville, it was in pretty bad shape, although it was immediately very interesting to me. I first really came up here to go to a Paul Winter concert.
Sure.
And then when I did, I looked around and said, that's kind of cool. And it was, I think, because of the natural beauty of the area, the hiking and stuff, it had attracted a little bit more of a countercultural following than a lot of other areas. And I think from some of the old history, too, there was kind of a core of artists. I don't know if you ever heard of the Biltmore House.
I have, but I'm not sure in what context.
It was at one time the largest private residence in the country.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the Vanderbilts lived.
Oh, okay. All right.
And it's like Buckingham Palace, basically. It's just on the other side of town from here. It's now a big tourist. You come check it out. But when they were building that, they just brought so many artisans in to design, build, and maintain it, and a lot of them just wound up staying. So I think there was this kind of a core artistic community that's been here since 20s or 30s or whatever.
Right.
Of course, Bob Moog being here once that became more well known, particularly when he started getting Big Brother going. I think interesting electronic music people started trickling in a little bit, but probably really about the time I started working at Moog, it seemed like it was really picking up steam.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to have to find a way to get there just for a visit somehow.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure I can find something. One of the last things that I want to touch base with you on before I let you go is your site, experimentalsynth.com. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting, and especially to me was interesting because that was kind of like one of the locuses where I started getting a lot of information from you, and not only from the site but also your postings on Facebook.
Yeah,
you seem to be able to sort of find cool stuff. And then on the Experimental Synth site, you share the videos often, as you do with the postings and social media. What drove you to do that? Was it just the desire to share, or was it the extension of kind of the chops you got being a marketing person? What got you into that?
Both of those. I really kind of started doing that when I was working at Moog, particularly when we were launching the Moog guitar.
Right.
One of the first videos that I did was kind of the initial Moog guitar video, and it was one where Lou Reed had come to the factory about 2 weeks before we were going to launch it, so we went and showed it to him, and I made sure I had a video camera with him when he played it at first, and he just went gaga over it. Had him and Vernon Reed, Fareed Hawk, and a few other Andre Chumley, I believe, is in that one too. And that video, I think it's still the most watched video on the Moog YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. It's got well over 600,000 views on it. That was a very early and strong education into the power of social media and things like that. So I did that, quite a bit of that when I was at Moog. And when I left, it was actually even more fun because I didn't have anybody else telling me how and what to do.
Right. You could run with it.
When you work somewhere, you got a boss and they have an opinion on things.
Yeah.
But when I was on my own, it's like I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want. It's gonna be cool, and it was cool. It's like it's really just kind of let my imagination run wild and feel myself while I was doing it.
Well, one of the things I like, especially when you kind of roll through the site, is the way that you kind of mix cool things you've seen other people do and sharing that. Mm-hmm. You share that right alongside the stuff that you're doing. Either I get the sense that even when you're kind of demoing something, it doesn't seem like a demo as much as you sharing yourself playing. It's almost as much about you playing and composing as it is about the gear, which I can really appreciate because in the end, when I'm looking at acquiring a piece of equipment, I seldom do it because I really want the piece of equipment. I do it because I want to imagine myself making better music because of that, right? And there's something about the way that you do videos that really makes me feel like I'm seeing that happening. So congratulations on that. I think that's a subtle but not easy to accomplish thing.
Yeah, well, thanks. And part of that is that I'm actually doing the stuff that I really like.
Yeah, that helps, right?
I think it's just an approach I've landed on and seems to work with me. I have a lot of friends who do similar types of videos, and we all have our own different approaches. And I was telling somebody one day I thought of mine not so much as tutorials, but as inspirationals.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a good way to put it, and quite effective. And so, congrats on that. Well, Chris, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your evening to chat with me. It was really fun to talk to you and fun to kind of cruise back through the years to kind of experience some of the things that you got to experience. It was really awesome.
It was kind of fun for me to walk down memory lane too.
Oh, well, yeah, cool. And for people who want to follow your stuff, there's experimentalsynth.com. which is where they can kind of get a really nice overview of a lot of the stuff you've done. You do a lot of postings on Facebook, which is, again, where I primarily follow you. You're Chris Stack there. Is there any other social media that you interact with a lot?
I have a little bit of everything. I'm on Instagram, Experimental Synth.
Okay.
I have a Facebook page of Experimental Synth, but there's, some of the recent changes, the way Facebook deals with that has made me put a little less effort into that than I used to. But I've got a Tumblr site. Actually, when I first started Experimental Synth, it was just a Tumblr blog that I pointed that URL to. But
I see. Okay.
Since switched it over to a Joomla backend, I'm actually thinking about redoing it here pretty soon in WordPress. Just a little easier maintenance.
Sure.
SoundCloud, Chris Stack and Experimental Synth on SoundCloud.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, hopefully people get a chance to dive into that and maybe be able to follow you as much as I do, because again, it's always eye-opening and fun to see what you're doing. So thanks again for your time, and have a great evening.
Oh, you too.
All right, bye. Well, there you go. A lot of history talking to Chris Stack. One little note, the item that he talked about that Paul Vaughn would be showing at NAMM turned out to be the, what was it called? The Vaughn wand, which sort of gives you the ability to do that same excitation factor, but do it on your own guitar instead of having to get one his. So it's a pretty cool addition to the world of electronic music stuff. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank everyone who I got a chance to talk to at NAMM for hanging out. And that's it for this week. I'll catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.